Welcome to Two Therapists Talking. The hope for this podcast is to talk about important issues related to couples and individuals who are struggling in their lives with many different issues. I'm David Thompson, a marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Sherie Christensen, marriage and family therapist. Please join us as we explore these issues together, and we hope you will learn and be enlightened along the way. Come find us at twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast. Hi, welcome back to Two Therapists Talking. I'm Sherie.
And I'm David.
And we are going to move into another personality disorder today.
Yep. We've covered a few.
We've covered one. We've covered NPD. We talked about that.
Yep.
And I recently presented at a conference and spoke on this topic about working with former spouses who have personality disorders and helping people understand, do they actually have a personality disorder, right? Or do they just have a lot of traits and tendencies?
Right.
Because just like we talked about with NPD, if you'll remember back, because of course you listen to every moment of all of these episodes.
Several times, yeah.
There's a spectrum, right, of the traits and tendencies.
Right.
So a lot of people may show up with some of these that we're going to talk about today. Some of these traits, some of these tendencies, or maybe a lot of them. But you may not qualify, or they may not qualify for a full diagnosis.
Right.
It's really important to understand and recognize if they're traits and tendencies, or if they really do strongly meet the full diagnostic criteria.
Right.
Because that's going to determine then how you interact with them and what level of consequences with your boundaries you're going to need, and how you engage if you need more distance or less distance, right?
Yeah, or even what level of treatment to seek.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. If you have someone who has full diagnostic criteria for any personality disorder, you are definitely going to need therapy.
Yeah, and really ought to be looking for specialized therapy. A lot of this stuff isn't going to be, you bring them to any therapist. We have specialties, we have, niches. We're not really good at everything. There's lots of different things to work on. And so there are clinics that will focus on, say, anxiety. There's clinics that will focus on narcissism or borderline. Mm-hmm. And so do your research for sure.
Yes. Yep. So as we look at these diagnostic criteria, again, remember, you've got the spectrum of behavior, and understanding where someone is on that spectrum is helpful. Even if they don't have all of the characteristics, just understanding, these tendencies are borderline tendencies.
Right.
And that can help you because the resources that you look at will help you. Like if you're looking at borderline resources, you can go, okay, that makes sense. So we're doing NPD and BPD just because these two personality disorders are kind of buzzwords, I feel like, in society, right? And especially with former relationships or current relationships, you hear that all the time. Well, it's usually, my husband or ex-husband is a narcissist, and
that's the guy, yep.
Yes, yep. And my wife or my ex-wife is borderline.
Yep.
Right? And so we want to look at and actually help you understand what that actually is,
and
instead
probably
of how it just shows up in society.
Yeah, for sure. And really to help people who, just like NPD, are thinking, I wonder if my spouse maybe has this.
Right.
But it's hard to ask about this stuff or talk about this stuff because there's so much stigma around it and so much shame if I'm borderline, not as much if it's NPD. Right. Not a lot of felt shame there.
A little less shame, a little more like attacking and
more.
How dare you?
Yeah. But borderline, this is a good one. And I have a lot of clients who want to know more about this and want to hear more about this.
Right.
So.
And the great thing is that with borderline, this is one of the I mean, if you're going to be diagnosed with a personality disorder, if somebody in your life is going to have a personality disorder, this is really kind of the best one in terms of trajectory, in terms of the prognosis, if they get help.
Yeah.
In fact, there's studies out there that demonstrate that some, people who are diagnosed with BPD and then get help for it, oftentimes and it's a long time, but this study looked at people over 10 years, and it was statistically significant. They had quite a number of people that no longer met the full criteria for BPD,
so
which is saying something, because it is a personality disorder, right? Like, it's not typically, when we talk about personality disorders, this is, and not typically, it's a long time pervasive pattern that isn't really going to shift much, but this one can.
And that's really important, because your first idea is this is some sort of life sentence. You can't say I have borderline. I'm not going to receive that well, because that means I'm like, I have a disability for life.
Right.
Is often the sentiment. So not true.
It's not true. There is quite a bit that can be done. And also, because of the personality disorders, borderline individuals tend to be more self-aware or willing to get help, much more than other personality disorders. So they're recognizing, they're seeing, like, I don't like how this is going, but
they have awareness.
Yes, I don't love this. I want to be different. I want to be able to show up differently in relationship. And so they're more likely to be aware of it, to seek help, and then to improve. So let's talk about the diagnostic criteria of this personality disorder, and then we'll do additional episodes on kind of talking about them in more detail, but we'll try to get through the diagnostic criteria today. So for borderline, this is, again, we talked about pervasive pattern of instability and of interpersonal relationships, self-image and affects, and marked impulsivity.
Right.
So all of those have to be present, right? Beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by, we're going to give you 9.
So an easy way to think of this, because there's always categories with these criteria, right?
Yeah, you have to have at least 5.
5 of the 9. An easy way to think about it is just relationships are really hard.
Yes.
There's like a lot of drama in relationships. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, they just seem to come hard. And usually what I hear is like things that aren't a big deal are, or things that shouldn't be are. Right.
It's outside. Yeah. It's outside the normal response.
Right.
For someone in that culture or society. Right.
Or even just what people are used to.
Right.
My other relationships are not like this. This relationship, there's just a lot of back and forth, up and down, conflict.
Yeah. So let's go through these criteria. The first one is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. And that's
frantic.
Huge. Yes.
I mean, everybody fears abandonment, right?
Right. Yes. But it's very big, very large. This is actually, if someone were to say, like, hey, what's the motive for why borderlines respond in the ways that they do?
For sure, yeah.
It would be abandonment, 100%. Right? We talked about with narcissism, you're looking at, image and control and power, right? With borderline, it is real or imagined abandonment. And this is so intensely distressful, even outside the realms of what, like, you may have absolutely no intent of abandoning this human being, right? But they are feeling it,
right,
because of something small, often, and that's triggering that inside of themselves.
And you get a sense of there's just lots of desperation.
Right.
You can tell they feel a lot of desperation about a lot of things.
Right.
Kind of like all or nothing. Oh no, any word, any attitude, any action can be the end.
Yes.
which is really hard.
Yeah. So that's the first one. The second one is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluing. So what this looks like, I'm going to break it down. This is also known, so if you've done some research or if you've looked into this criteria, this diagnostic criteria, is what is referred to oftentimes as splitting. So they talk about borderlines splitting. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about someone treating someone like it's kind of like all or nothing about who they are and their value and all that. And they can do it to themselves, they can do it to other people.
Right.
So you may one day be the sun, the moon, and the stars to them and everything, the most perfect human that ever walked the planet. And then one thing happens and suddenly you're the worst
Right.
that ever was. And
Right.
no one should ever interact with you again.
Right.
Right? And it can go back and forth. Sometimes it's you go from one to the other and you stay there, but oftentimes, especially if you have a deep and continued relationship with them, it will go back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
And so you can see how that would be very unstable and uncertain and confusing to try to understand. It's intense. It's again that all or nothing. Like you're the best human ever, or you are the worst human ever.
Which is often why the partner really wants to figure it out, because when you're on, you are really, really on.
Yes.
And that actually gives them a lot of motivation to continue. They don't like when you're off, but they always speak fondly of when we're on. It's just the best ever.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 3, identity disturbance. So markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self.
Right.
Everybody struggles with this. We've talked at length about this. With borderline, it's particularly strong.
Yeah, it's very cute. They really have a hard time with their image.
So they vacillate a lot between this good and bad, and the bad is this total worthlessness, just utter, nobody would want to be with me, not ever, which is really tiring for everybody, and them too.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
exhausting.
It's really hard. And we'll talk about this later, but it's important to point out that suicidal ideation is part of this. It's one of the criteria, and that wouldn't count for this one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that would be a separate diagnostic criteria, but it is something that obviously comes from this space of having this unstable self-image.
Right.
Okay, number 4 is impulsivity. So you remember that from the beginning. You have to have that impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. So there's got to be at least 2 places where it could damage them. So spending might be one. Sex is often one, like being really hypersexual. Other addictions, overeating, these types of things.
Just about anything, really.
Right. That's going to actually potentially be self-damaging.
Number 5, there's recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. I hear this a lot from clients where the fight will get so big that the person will say, well, I'm just going to go kill myself.
Right.
And they will often do something like go lock themselves in a room or in a bathroom. And so they go there almost as like if all else fails to get the outcome that I want. If we're fighting and the other person is not backing down or apologizing or saying whatever, then it becomes, well, then this is what I'm going to do to myself.
Right. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be attempts. It can very much be threats of it. It can be cutting, right? That self-mutilating behavior. Yeah. It can be kind of acting like maybe you're going to, or just doing different things like that, like maybe writing a note or But it's all, again, in this attempt to, not be abandoned. It doesn't, and I don't want to say that and say like, oh, you never have to worry about that, right? Like they
Right.
absolutely, there's a potential for them to follow through with that.
Right. But you see a pattern of they will go to this
Right.
when
Right.
pushed.
Yeah. As opposed to the general population
Right.
that doesn't go, oh,
Don't normally say
we're
that.
fighting.
Yeah.
I'm, going to kill myself. So number 6 is affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. So again, remember affect, that's your emotions, right? Your feelings. So that's instability in your emotions. And you just have a very reactive mood. So
Right.
it's unstable, so it's up and down, like you never quite know what you're going to get.
Which is why traditionally you think of borderline, and there's books written about this, titles like Walking on Eggshells,
Right.
where you're just or thin ice. This concept of you're very cautious and guarded, because normally you would have an idea where someone might be
Right.
based on what's happened, but not so much here, where
Yes.
it can be anything.
Right.
And so you're always very careful around this person.
Yep. You're just trying to kind of manage and figure out and always try to understand what's going on with their mood or how to prevent something, from getting crazy. So that can include intense episodic dysphoria. So dysphoria is like a dissatisfaction with life, right? But like a very intense space where it's not just like, oh, they're mad at you or they're not mad at you, right? It can be lots of different ways that their emotions are unstable. Like one day they're super happy and then they're just having a really just so dissatisfied, like nothing is worth it in life. Another day they could just be super irritable at everything that's going on. Or another time their instability might show up as just really intense anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's not always going to be that. It'll be good. And then it'll be this, and it'll be good. And it'll be that. And you just are never sure
Right.
how or when that's going to change. And it can change so quickly and so intensely.
Yeah.
And the difference here, so a lot of times we see a confusion with or not understanding like the difference between, for example, like bipolar and borderline because you have this affective instability. Well, this with borderline, you're looking at an hour, couple of hours, something like that, is not really more than a day in one mood. Whereas with borderline, with it being a mood disorder, whereas with bipolar, with it being a mood disorder, you're going to see longer stretches in being manic or being depressed. So there's some differentiation that you need to do there, and we can talk more about that later. But just to point that out here.
Number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. And so you could substitute purposelessness, feeling like things don't matter, nothing matters, which again, one of the things about borderline, everybody has these a little bit at times, or maybe even a lot at times, but with borderline, it's common.
Yeah.
These things are common occurrences where
Chronic.
now they're really, really low and they feel like nothing matters. They feel empty, and it happens often.
Yeah. And maybe even kind of this underlying state of being, right? As opposed to, for example, again, going back to when people confuse bipolar and borderline, obviously a feeling of like emptiness in the world, nothing matters, and things like that can be symptoms of depression.
Right.
Right, which is a part of bipolar. And so recognizing like, hey, there can be a differential diagnosis here. Like look at what is this part of borderline, or is this depression, or is this bipolar? You
Right.
have to kind of pull those apart. So number 8 is...
Eight's kind of, Eight's like the flagship here of all these.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a couple.
There are, that's true.
Flagships.
Usually, if I'm in a session with someone and I hear this, that's what first clues me in to like,
maybe
we may be talking
yeah.
borderline here.
Yep. And it kind of goes a little bit along the lines of with 6 with the affective instability, but
Right.
this is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger.
In fact, just today I had a client sharing with me how his adult daughter's cat was scratching furniture and her reaction was to be physical. Very intense, surprised everybody around, something like that where it doesn't fit the situation.
Right. Yeah. Frequent displays of temper, constant anger, reoccurring physical fights potentially. Like you don't have to have all of these, but these are examples of how that might show up. Intense sarcasm or bitterness, right? Just kind of everything seems fine and all of a sudden there's this switch that just flips and they're so angry.
And the people around are surprised because it just doesn't fit.
Yes.
It's like, I'd be upset about that, but this display of intensity does not fit.
It doesn't match. Yeah.
Number 9 is transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Transient stress-related paranoid ideation.
Yeah, start with that.
Let's start with that.
So basically what this is saying is if they start having a lot of stress, right, then they may end up in a space of either that paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So paranoid ideation, right, it's kind of self-explanatory, right? That's that paranoid space. Like, this is bad thing. This bad thing's going to happen. This is,
you believe things that are not real or true, but you're really caught up in them.
Yes. Yes. That kind of a very paranoid
People are out
space.
to get me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. People are out to get me. They're going to leave me, like all of those different kinds of things. And then dissociative symptoms, right? That's a space of kind of checking out from what's going on around them. So for some people, you may not notice it, right? It's kind of something that they do internally. They'll dissociate if something's really distressful. Just kind of check out from what's going on and not really be there. They'll be somewhere else in their mind, right?
Right.
That would be a kind of a lower version. But severe dissociative symptoms will look even like they're doing things and saying things, and later they literally have no recollection. It's not that they are forgetting because they're, or lying about remembering that something happened. They literally actually don't have they can't remember. Like it's not something that's even in their space of being able to recall. Sometimes if you're talking with them and you can process with them and they're in a space where they want to understand or want to move forward and they're in treatment, sometimes they can recall and go, oh yeah, but that doesn't feel like that was me.
Right.
It feels like that was somebody else doing something else, but because I wouldn't do that. Right. So there's like this dissociation from their experience and what's going on. So that's number 9.
And how many do they need?
They need 5
Okay.
out of 9.
So 5
At
of the
least
9.
5
At least 5 would
of the 9.
technically be a diagnosis of borderline.
Right. As long as that's coming from a qualified mental health professional. We should throw that out there because, again, what you're looking at, like you're seeing some patterns of behavior from the outside. And that's what we want to point out. We want to say, hey, these are what the criteria are. Look at these, kind of see, does this person match many of these criteria? Or you could be looking at yourself, do I match some or many of these criteria?
Which is always hard because self-reporting is, we don't want to admit a lot of stuff. So
right.
Usually it's...
But you might notice it.
Yeah,
you might really notice it,
borderline.
which is great. But again, you need a professional to look at this because you're going to have to pull apart a lot of different things. You're going to have to, they are going to have to pull apart a lot of different things. They're going to have to look at these differential diagnoses. They're going to have to look at like, oh, is this a mood disorder, which is really different, even though it looks similar in a lot of ways, right? Bipolar is going to look similar in a lot of ways to borderline, but it's actually really different, and you treat it completely differently. Right? A lot of people get confused between the criteria between an NPD and BPD and other personality disorders as well. There are little pieces in there that you want to pull apart. Like, you need someone who's a professional who understands this to kind of pull it apart. Because, again, there's a lot of comorbidity with personality disorders and mood disorders.
Right.
So that means that you can have more than one thing, right? And you just have to be able to really pull all the details apart and understand, because part of the diagnostic criteria and diagnosing is that none of these things are better explained by a different disorder, or whether that's a mood disorder or another personality disorder or something like that. Yep. So again, that clinical diagnosis is really important in terms of,
especially getting them on board. If
it's a diagnosis, right? If you're just looking at patterns, right? Or you're like, oh yeah, this person has a lot of these things, or I have a lot of these things. I want to kind of be aware of that, right? That's really different. But in terms of actually getting a diagnosis, you really have to have a clinician do that.
Yeah.
Okay, come back next time and we'll talk a little bit more about BPD and how to work with that.
And what to do. Yep. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to Two Therapists Talking. We look forward to sharing more conversations with you. Connect with us at twotherapisttalking.com or email podcast@twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.